For anybody who doesn't know, Ryan's in New York, in kind of the crazy center of it all. So, how you
Unbelievable.
been? You've been keeping in inside?
Hey man, I'm so fortunate, man. I have all my family is healthy, and they're in Ohio too, just like you. And
Mhm.
I have a nice rig here that I can work on, and I can get some stuff done. And thankfully, I still have some great clients who are coming to me for mixes and some production work. So that's
Yeah.
keeping me busy, keeping my head in the game. And if I could just take a second, I hope everybody out there who's watching, I hope you guys are healthy and safe, and I hope your families are healthy and safe and continue to be throughout this nightmare. And we'll get through it, man. But
Yeah.
got to
Yep.
keep your heads down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, cool. So yeah, what have you been up to lately? Like inside doing a lot of mixing or?
Yeah, well, yeah, a fair amount. I mean, I have like 3 projects on deck right now.
Yeah.
I'm doing a bunch of stuff for a new artist on Atlantic, who I'm really super
Nice.
into. Her name's Gaida. Um,
Mhm.
did 4 mixes for her. I am doing some Caribbean stuff, which is really fun and really amazing. It's like a mix between Caribbean hip hop and pop music, and that's been interesting and cool and fun. I'm working with a producer actually that I worked with years ago. His name's Andreo Hurd, and you would know his name. Fanatic is what he goes by. He did a bunch of stuff
Mhm.
for Little Kim and Lil Cease and um, Beyonce, and so he's got a lot of records under his belt. And he's just a really good friend. I've known him for it's got to be going on 20 years now. And he's actually putting out a record of his own, and it's super fun. It's like
Nice.
super sexual chocolate, like almost Prince-like, and like so that's been
Nice.
cool to work on. And also something a little closer to home, a guy that I kind of knew in the band scene in northeastern Ohio when I still lived there, has a
Mhm.
really cool band called the Vindies. They're a huge band in northeastern Ohio, and they're getting bigger. And he came to me for a mix, and he was just like, "Oh, I want to see what you could do with this. It's got some hip hop drums in it, but
Mhm.
it's a little more rock oriented." So I
Yeah.
have this bunch of different kinds of things that I get to work on, and that's keeping me sharp. So I love that. I can't complain, dude.
Right.
Very lucky.
Nice. That's great. Well, cool. So let's jump right in. So what we're going to do today is we'll start off with like a little bit of a interview with you and I, hear a little bit about your background and stuff, and then we're going to be taking questions from the audience. So for everybody that's watching on Crowdcast, below the video, there's an Ask a Question section, so you guys can click on that, put your question in there, and then you have the ability to upvote each other's questions. So if you see something in there that you want to see answered, make sure you upvote that. So yeah, let's start in. So Ryan, for anybody who doesn't know, how did you get started in all this craziness?
I stumbled into it basically. I didn't set out to do it. Before
Mhm.
I came to New York in 1997, I would have been hard pressed to tell you exactly what a mix engineer did or a
Mhm.
producer did. I mean, I knew a little bit about it because I was screwing around with what little I had. I had, some very basic things, a couple of dual tape decks and a little Radio Shack mixer, and then I graduated, I think, to a 4-track. But I was doing MIDI sequencing and stuff, so I was a keyboard player.
Right.
So like the multi-track thing made sense to me. I came to New York in 1997 and started working in a music store, and started buying more recording equipment and just learning on my own. I would go
Yeah.
and read books in Barnes and Nobles, and I would sit there in the aisle and read them because I couldn't afford to buy the books at the time. So I
Yeah.
learned as much as I could on my own, and like kind of screwed a lot of stuff up, working on recording stuff for my band. Eventually bought a 24/8 console and a Tascam 16-track tape machine, and so that's how I started. And I was
Yeah.
just doing stuff for my own band and for my own fun and whatnot. One day,
Yeah.
one of the guys who worked in the stock department at the store that I was working at had a client who said, "Hey, do you know anybody who knows how to record? I could use some help in my little studio." It turned out to be a guy from Island Records who was a well-known A&R guy
Mhm.
and producer. And
Mhm.
he was gracious, and he let me spend time in his studio working on his personal stuff and cutting my teeth. And I learned a ton and made a ton of mistakes. And it was really kind of a great incubator for me. And it got me super interested. I realized at that point, like, hey, man, you could actually make a career out of this. You could make a living out of this. And I just got really ambitious from there on, and I went after it, man. So I took every opportunity I could. I worked cheap. I worked free. I worked 80 hours a week. I worked for anybody who would hire me. You know, because I knew, you know, I don't know the exact quote, but there's an old adage that says you got to spend 10,000 hours on something to become an expert. And so I always kept it in my mind. I'm like, you know, I just keep working, keep working. It doesn't matter if you screw it up. I mean, sure, you don't want to promise something to somebody and then not be able to deliver. So I worked hard at not doing that.
Right.
Didn't always win at that because I was a little too ambitious. But you know, I just worked really hard at it, man. I made it my you know, my goal to get really good at it as much as I possibly could, and I loved it. So I had the energy to put into it, and that's really where it came from. And at the same time, I was a musician, so I loved to record stuff on my own, and I loved to be able to make things sound better. And every time I heard a new set of monitors, you know, that it really tickled me. I am a true audio nerd. It's just the way, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I want to unpack a little bit of that. So, what did you play in the band? Tell me about the band.
I started playing, well, there were a couple of bands, but I started out playing keyboards when I was fairly young. I spent like all my, you know, money that I ever made at any job buying keyboard stuff. And so I used to open up for rock bands in Ohio, just as like, I would play a sequence and I would do a top line over it. And, you know, like I'd be like a, you know, 20-minute set or something like that. And it was just fun for me. And the rock bands liked it because it wasn't, it would never sound as big as the rock band, you know what I mean? So it was like calmer, tamer opening act. And this was, you know, the late 80s, early 90s. So it was super, super cheesy, you know, like hair metal bands, stuff like that. So it was fun. So and I got a penchant for performing. But through that, I met this guy named Max Lowe, who is an incredible musician. He's from the same hometown. He's trained and I'm not, so he was like a really good counterpart to learn from. And so he decided he was going to move to New York, and of course I couldn't let that happen without me coming too. Very shortly thereafter, I moved to New York, and you know, that's when I started the music store. We had a band. I ended up playing bass in it though, because I picked up bass one day and I was just like, man, I love this. It's 4 strings. You know, this is like the easiest thing in the world to deal with. And I love low end, so that was just kind of perfect. That actually it's weird to think about it now. Being a bassist and a keyboard player made it a lot easier for me to understand what I really wanted to get out of mixes, because I understood what I wanted in the low end, the low register, and I understood padding and stereo and all that kind of stuff and multi-tracking. So that really set me up to be the engineer that I became, you know. Just passion for all that kind of stuff. And being an instrumentalist helps you to understand the artist that you work with. And so that helped me with communication quite a bit. So I think all those things unwittingly prepared me to get into this field.
So this is kind of interesting because primarily we know you as a mixing engineer, an engineer and producer and all that. I don't think a lot of people know about the musical side of you quite as much. So this is kind of fun to unpack. So I see like obviously some guitars back there.
Yeah, and like I have native instruments, blowout kit, you know, and tons of sample libraries and stuff like that. As a keyboard player and doing sequences early on, I was always really attracted to more cinematic stuff. So that's probably what's kept me out of producing much more mainstream stuff in terms of like writing songs and that kind of stuff. Although I've done a fair bit of that, but it's just not my focus. Now, what it's turned into is it's just something extra that I can offer artists that I really believe in and I think need it. You know, if they need some extra production help, I say to them, oh, look, you know, like I really believe this needs a Rhodes part. And thankfully, I can play the part in and send them a quick demo of it, you know, and a lot of times clients just go, wow, that's just crazy. Like, I know you're a mix engineer and like you do really big records and you're good at it and all that stuff. But to be able to work with you on that level too is just kind of like everything 360. And it gives artists and producers and labels a lot of confidence to have somebody that's a little bit more well-rounded, because there are quite a lot of really fantastic, amazing, talented, accomplished engineers out there who don't play an instrument. They understand it all, but they just don't play an instrument. So it's a little bit of an extra thing that I think helps sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So do you ever have like, you'll be in the middle of a mix project, like you said, like you'll need to do, you'll hear a Rhodes part or something and do it. Do you ever just kind of fill in the blanks for people and then like just tell them when you send them the mix and yeah.
All the time. And people love that because look, a lot of people coming in to work with professional mixers and producers, a lot of them haven't done it before. It's new to them. Mm-hmm. And this is their baby. This is their project. They've probably been saving up money for a long period of time where they finally got a sponsor and there's a lot of responsibility there, a lot of weight, right? Mm-hmm. And so when they find somebody who feels competent and confident and, oh, did we lose you? I think we lost you. Oh, wait.
We're having a little bit of Crowdcast fun.
That's okay. I don't know where we left off.
You were saying, let's see, I think the last thing I heard was that it was cool. There we go. Awesome.
Pardon my vaping.
There we go. Sorry about that, guys. And let me know if that audio problem with my mic is solved now too. I think we should be better here. The Borg. Nice. I sounded like a Borg. Sweet. Okay. Yeah, let's keep going. So we were talking about just the extra bonus of you being able to play stuff during a mix. So it was, I think my question was like, if you just kind of fill in the blanks for people and send that when you send the mix.
Yeah. All the time. And the thing is, you got to be careful when you're dealing with clients. You want and you want to offer that sort of thing. You got to be really careful not to step on any toes. Number one, right? Because this is something that they poured all their energy and sometimes all their money and all their heart and their soul into. And you don't want to suggest that they've done a poor job or whatever. So I always try to frame it as, I think this could really help the song, and that's the important notion right there. Don't offer to do something like add a part or take out a part, unless you really totally believe in your heart that it's going to service the song. Yeah. And do it in a respectful way by just saying like, I tried this thing. If you hate it, totally understand. If you love it, like I think it belongs in there as well, then I think it may help elevate the song. So it's really about trying to be helpful as possible. Yeah. Rather than just trying to get, like slide your bass part in. Exactly. You know what I mean? It's just.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't try and sneak it past them, basically. Yeah.
You're going to know, like, if you're just ambitious and you just change a part just to change a part and it doesn't really do anything fantastic for the song, what's the point?
Right.
And now you're burning a bridge with a client who's just going to be like, wow, this guy just wants to get in on my thing.
Right. Yeah. And also weird. Yeah.
And also a little weird. Yeah. He looks, smells weird. Now he acts weird.
Right. Perfect. So let's see. So how much production stuff are you doing kind of lately on different mixes? Is it just kind of like whenever it just needs it, or?
Yeah, it's sort of random. It's whenever it comes up. I do production, just sort of outright as well. People come to me with like very, sparse tracks and, they want some stuff put together for it. And I do a fair bit of that, culturing new artists at the behest of the labels, who I've had relationships for a very long time and they understand what I had to offer. And so generally they'll call me up when they have a new artist and say, hey, we got, so-and-so, and they have never really worked in this kind of an environment before. We'd like you to have a meeting with them and sort of walk them through what's going to happen next, which is we're going to get into the studio and create. And that gives me an opportunity to set the atmosphere and set the tone and the mood and try to make it super positive and super fun and super creative and just sort of open to their ideas. And my job is to bring those into fruition by getting the technology out of the way and making the process simple, and then also being friendly. You got to have a great bedside manner.
Right.
Because you got to remember, a lot of these artists, when they're coming to the studio, unless they're super experienced, they're probably a little nervous. They're like, what's going to happen? How's this going to come out? How long does it take? How much it will cost? and you're talking about something that's very near and dear to their heart.
Yep.
That it's a part of it's being respectful too, I guess is what I mean to say.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and there's a person who's just sitting there listening to it and making decisions and critiquing it, and yeah, it can be all intimidating. So when you were starting out, so kind of again, like continuing down the line here, what was the first big studio gig you got?
Big studio what?
Gig. Yeah.
Gig. Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess it really depends on what you define as big. So probably around 2000 or so, I was looking for work. Frankly, the work that I had before that had sort of dried up, and I found this studio in Soho called Soho Studios, which is gone. It's been gone for a long time now. But guys who were running the studios needed somebody who was slick with Pro Tools. And once I learned that, I was like, all right, I'm going to get slick with Pro Tools, because I was a tape guy before that.
Right. Right.
The console is how I cut my teeth. So I got really fast on Pro Tools. I learned all the key commands, and I just got stupid at a time when a lot of other people weren't. They just weren't with Pro Tools. It wasn't new. It was a few years old by then. And I think the iteration was like version 3 or something like that. But I just got really fast with editing and focused on vocal tracking and editing to be super fast. And as it turns out, this studio was servicing a lot of hip hop clients and had a resident producer named Stretch Armstrong, who was he was a radio DJ in Hot 97 at the time and was extremely popular in the hip hop thing. He was also bringing in new artists, and he had a relationship with the studio. So we would get sort of these young artists all the time and young producers all the time. And it was there that I connected with people who would go on later to have more success and become huge artist managers and presidents of record labels and huge producers. And I could sit here and name names, but like one of those guys was Paul Rosenberg, who's Eminem's manager.
Right.
Brought in 50 Cent, and 50 Cent. So I was doing sessions there, just any random session, and there were a lot of them were hip hop. But he ended up bringing this producer named Red Spida, who did a song called "Realist N-Word." And I won't say the word, I'm too white. And so they did this song. It was a duet between him and Biggie, and I got the chance to mix it, and it ended up hitting the radio, and it was a huge success. So that was the first thing that I heard on the radio that I felt like was truly a big gig that I got to take command of and had some success. So maybe that's the first time.
Yeah. Did you know that it was going to do that well?
Hell no.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just trying my best to do the best work I could and make connections and network and do as much work as I could, moving towards that goal of getting all the mistakes out of the way and getting my 10,000 hours in so that I could build my confidence, so that there weren't so many things that felt like were out of my control. Like a lot of young mixer, engineer, producer guys and girls get confused by things like compression. Where and when do I apply it? Do I put the EQ before or after? Or what's in your mix chain? What's on your master bus? Like all this stuff, when taken out of context, doesn't make any sense, and you can't apply it. It's not like a preset you can just dump on. It's something that you've got to learn the thought process of, and that's an understanding that I had early enough that let me figure it out. So
Nice. When was the first time that you made something, listened back to it, and thought, maybe I can do this? Something that you liked, like earliest.
Still waiting for that day.
Yeah, right.
No, it's very difficult in the beginning because it's hard to have confidence that you're doing the right thing, and you always listen to what if you're a thinking person and you're really serious about this, you're always going to listen to what you've done, your work, at some point when you have a little bit of distance from it and go, wow, I could have done that differently, better, or I really like this part, but it doesn't work with this. You're always dissecting your own work. And you're going to need to do that if you want to, proceed and get better and then be a quote unquote professional. I still to this day listen to a lot of the stuff that I've done and I cringe, but they were, some of them were hit songs and people were like, I love that mix. So Take
Yep.
it with a grain
Yeah.
of salt. You're going to be your own worst judge, harshest judge.
Mhm.
But I don't know that that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I think you should always try to
Yeah.
reinvent yourself and always try to re-educate and, you know,
Yeah.
always be on that path. I'm still on that path. Just this morning, I was watching videos about how to do things that like I already know how to do, but I want to know what your perspective is on it because it could give
Right.
me a different context that might let me do it in a different way.
Yeah. And it's always fun to, kind of pick something up, and then when you go into the next mix, you try it out and explore and all that.
Totally.
That's one of the best things about this, I think, is like the whole learning thing never stops, and it's always changing, and genres are changing and tastes are changing, and
Yeah. And,
it's
and
really
gear changes and procedures and techniques change.
yeah.
And the amount of information that we have now changes all the time. I mean, I
Mm.
always gotta remember though, that when I started out doing this, the internet wasn't a thing. You
Right.
couldn't go on YouTube and watch videos of Andrew Sheps being a master at what he does.
Yeah.
You couldn't watch Puremix. You know what I mean? You
Right.
gotta
Yeah.
just be reading it from books. And like you said, I would make a mistake and then I would realize that it was a mistake. And then I would try to go back and learn all the parts and pieces so that I could figure out what I missed and then
Yeah.
try it again. You know?
Right.
I
Right.
don't know if it's better or worse. I think it might be a little bit confusing the amount of information that's out right now. But
Yeah.
thankfully, there are distillations of people who really know what they're talking about, like Puremix,
Right.
where you can go and you're not necessarily listening to some random dude with like grass stained sneakers. You know, he
You're
just
right.
he just finished cutting his lawn and he works a 9 to 5 all week. And he doesn't really know any more than you, except for he found out one tiny little thing.
Right.
And
Hmm.
like I said, those things are all great, but you have to put them all in context. And so that's the important part.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Another kind of crazy thing about it is it's it's just amazing. Like there's obviously like we're doing it, and so many other people are doing it right now with all the quarantine stuff going on, but it's also amazing that we have these online communities that you can go and like see you pop up in, which is insane. And a lot of times like everybody's very accessible and very willing to kind of answer questions, and I think that dynamic has changed over time too. Didn't
It's
used
a
to be
totally
so
different
free
world.
flowing, and
Yeah,
yeah.
totally different world.
Yeah.
I would have never imagined that you could interact with people who are doing the job that you want to do. I
Right.
remember, I
Yeah.
remember I got a keyboard years ago. It was a Roland keyboard, and it was like the newest hot thing at the time. And
Hmm.
there was a demo song in there by a producer named Eric Persing, who did like a whole
Mm.
bunch of records at that time. This was the late '90s, I think. And I was infatuated with this bass sound that he had in it. Right? I was like, how
Mm.
do you do that? Because it wasn't in the presets anywhere in the keyboard. He clearly made the preset himself. Right?
Ah. Hmm.
So I actually tracked this guy down and found out what studio he works in. And being the precocious little jerk that I was, I called that place and I got
Nice.
him on the phone. And I
Hmm.
just like sheepishly said, "Hey man, in that demo song you did for that Roland keyboard, how did you get that bass sound?" He's like, it's in the manual. Just look it up." And he hung up the phone.
Oh man.
Well, I don't
You
blame
think
them.
you?
Like,
Yeah.
who at that time wanted to be accessible by phone? No one.
Right. Right. And that's kind of, yeah, that's exactly the point, right? It's like it was a different world back then. I wonder if you called that guy today, if he'd be more free flowing with the info and all that, you know?
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I should
Yeah.
I should try to get a hold of him and let him
Yeah.
know, hey, I actually made something out of myself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I remember when you
Why
hung
you
up.
refused
Uh,
to give me the
you,
goddamn patch?
yeah. You would think that somebody like going into that level of detail of who made the song in my Roland keyboard, and then he likes the bass patch enough to track me down and ask me about it. You would think that there'd be a little bit of flattery there that he'd be want to like
Maybe,
want to
and
talk
maybe
about.
he was in the middle of a very expensive production with some great artists, and he was just like, I don't have time for you, kid.
Right, right, right. Yeah,
It's possible.
crazy,
If somebody
crazy.
found my phone number and called me, I would be a little bit flattered, but I'd be like, yo, man, hit me up.
Also,
Hit me on Instagram or like
yeah,
go watch my Puremix videos. It'll tell you everything.
right. Everybody, we'll post Ryan's phone number at the end of this so you can call him.
Sure. It's 551
8675309.
calls from 4:15 to 4:18 a.m. every Tuesday, every second Tuesday of the month.
Nice. If it's a full moon.
Right. It was a full moon.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling
Awesome. Well, you've worked on some obviously massive, massive records. So like Eminem, Jay-Z doing the name drop thing, but Usher, Kid Cudi, Rihanna, T.I., The Game, just insane stuff. What is the difference for you when you're working with a superstar artist like that and an indie artist?
Nothing.
Yeah.
With the exception of the superstar artist generally is a superstar artist because they're professional. They've learned how to work in the environment, how to interact with people, how to get the most out of every situation, how to organize things. And they have a team in place that does things that the average individual may not even think of to prepare and to make sure that everything is set and it's ready. But the mentality is the same. It's about how do I get the most out of what's here in front of me, and how do I interact with this artist to get the most out of them, or do I need to get the hell out of the way? You know, I mean, a lot of times that's the case too. It's just a sensibility that I think works in both zones and at every place in between. And I think if you treat everything like that, and you treat everybody with the equal amount of respect, as you know, as much as possible, then that'll take you much further. You know, some of the younger artists who really just don't know much, you know, I tend to like channel them towards other people first and say, hey, I think this is going to be really beneficial if you do this. And then when you're ready with this, come back to me and I can help you put the pieces together. And all that stuff. I try to evaluate every artist and every project on its own merit.
Yeah.
There is no one size fits all.
Right. Yeah. So how about the pressures of that? Do you feel it, or is it still just a job?
It's rarely just a job. It can be sometimes, especially when you have to do tedious things, or you have somebody who is disrespectful of your time and they make you double back on yourself and do something over again because they didn't provide you with enough information, or they didn't do something right. So that's when it's a job. But it's rarely not fun. Like, I always enjoy it because of what we just talked about, is you get to try new things. And I think that's super important, is not painting yourself into a corner and not doing the same thing every time. If you do that, if you formulate something, if you template it past a certain amount, then I think you paint yourself into a corner. There are a lot of things that you can do to set yourself up to make your workflow faster that are template-ish, meaning like I have templates where, you know, it's set up with all my buses that I particularly might want to use, and my effects and sends, and, you know, my starting point on my Mixbus and that stuff. But that's about where it ends. And I bring all that into a fresh session, and I pick and choose what I think I'm going to use, and then what I'm not using, I get rid of. You know, I don't need my session populated by all kinds of stuff. If you look at my mix sessions, there ain't a ton of stuff on them, bro. There's not a plugin on every channel. There's not 5 plugins on every channel. I try to set myself up as cleanly as possible before I start doing all that kind of stuff. So if I need to make gain changes, I do that. I get a relative balance and a relative pan, and I make sure my gain staging to my mix bus is right, and all that kind of stuff. And that sets me up. And I find that if I do that enough and I do it the right way, I am doing so much less. I just make better decisions. The mixes come out 10 times better because I'm not over applying stuff where it just doesn't need to be. I think that's what people do fall into quite easily, because, hey, we got all these plugins, must be useful for something, right? That's not always.
I bought it, I got to use it.
And try to justify their purchases all the time as well, right? So we see online and forums, and when we're talking about the difference between this mic or that mic, or these speakers or those speakers, and people defend what they spend their money on to the death. My advice is use what you have. You know, and make the best out of what you have. And if you find you're missing a tool, go find that tool.
That's kind of a key that I used. That was told to me by somebody, I can't remember who, but they basically said, like, don't go out and like buy new plugins all the time. It's wait until you feel like you have a lack of something. Like, if it's like, I cannot get the sound that I'm hearing in my head with the tools that I have, then I need to go and look for something. But
Dude,
Otherwise, you're just shopping.
you can do so much with stock plugins. I mean, I've done a couple of mix challenges where the challenge was don't use any specialty compressors or anything else like that. Use the stock stuff that comes in Pro Tools or Logic or whatever. And I'm always surprised by how well I can actually execute a mix with some very basic tools. That doesn't mean I don't love the higher end stuff, and that doesn't mean I'm not going to use it at every opportunity. But I use it where it's necessary and where I think it actually elevates things. Right. So if I need something that's got some more character, that's different, then I can reach for it. But you can really accomplish it with very little. Records were made for such a very long period of time. I mean, a lot of records that you've heard all your life and love were made with very few tools. And a lot of times it was just because they were tracked well. You know what I mean? You have an amazing tracking engineer and they do a great job and it sounds amazing already. When it gets to you as a mixing engineer, that is one of the most pleasing things. I'm sure that you can relate is when you get a set of files and everything is neatly organized and labeled and color coded. And it sounds like it was tracked well, properly in a good room, like good players.
Right. And it's that difference too of like, you don't spend the first half of the day cleaning and fixing and doing like just tedious stuff. You actually get into the creative right away. And it, everything elevates because of that.
I've taken this approach to it, and it may be a little bit harsh sometimes. Not harsh. I'm not harsh about it, but it's like if you and I were sitting at a dinner table, right? And you pushed towards me a plate that was just a mess. It was full of, like the mashed potatoes and the peas were mixed and the pork chops were undercooked and all that stuff. I'm going to take that plate and push it right back to you and say, I need you to fix all this stuff, or I'm going to have to raise the rate to compensate me for the extra time that's going to take me to fix all this kind of stuff. So it's your choices, one way or the other. We can do that one way or the other. But I value my time very much. I'm a busy person most of the time. I'm a very busy person, as you are, and a lot of mix engineers are. And so we expect more than being pushed a plate full of garbage. So I try to put that responsibility on them. It has two effects. It doesn't have me wasting a lot of my time, and it also gives an education to the person you're pushing it back towards. It's just and it's another thing with the bedside manner. You kind of have to gently and respectfully say, this is kind of a mess, and here's what I think you need to do in order to fix it so that it's ready for a mix. You walk through it, you give them an education, and chances are you've won that client. Because you were honest with them, you were kind, and you were respectful, and you gave them some information that is only going to elevate their game. And if they can't appreciate that, then that's on them.
That's a great point, because it's not just saying like, hey man, this is a mess, I'm not doing extra work for you, fix it, and then don't waste my time and send it back to me. It's not doing that, for one, and then two, you're not just taking their money and turning out a mix of whatever they gave you and saying, here you go, which they may or may not be happy with at the end of that. But you're actually saying like, here's the things that could be better, and this is a better way to work with people, and it's going to make the song better.
Absolutely. I think one of the worst things you can do is take gigs for money. A lot of younger engineers, they're just desperate for a paycheck. I understand that. Totally get that. I mean, we all have to eat and live and survive. But you aren't entitled to $1,500 a mix just because somebody hired you to do it. Sorry. Like I wouldn't go to McDonald's and expect, a world-class ribeye, Wagyu steak. Ain't gonna happen. So know what you're getting into when you get into it with a client who doesn't necessarily understand the whole process. And if you're at the level which you can confidently do so, try to help them as much as possible. I guarantee. And this is just from a business perspective. If any of you guys or ladies out there who are endeavoring to be professional mix engineers, do yourself a big favor and make sure that you offer a valuable service to your client and be as helpful and available as possible. That will win you clients. Clients over time snowball, and you build up this Rolodex of people that you worked with, and they remember you and say, hey, that guy, Mark Abrams, he was on point, and he was honest, and he was kind and thoughtful, and he helped me out an awful lot. You bet your sweet butt I'm going back to him for the next.
Yeah. And I mean, making it fun and like, just bringing him through the process, it can be pretty stressful. Not to mention financially stressful. But yeah. Well, so on the thought of it's not the gear, it's the ear. Let's show off some gear. Awesome. All right. So Ryan sent me some pictures before this, and I'm gonna try and pull this up, and we'll see if this thing crashes on me here. All right. Let's see if we got it. Looking good. Okay, cool. So can you see that, Ryan?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Cool. Okay, so this is your quarantine setup here.
Yeah. I'll describe it if you'd like me to.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
this is like a really super condensed home studio kind of thing. And yeah, I would consider it at this point my quarantine setup. I'm super lucky I have it all here and I'm able to work. It's not in an ideal environment. As you can see, the room is not treated, entirely. I have a wall that's got, some diffusion on it. I've got some, bass absorbers and things like that to help out a little bit. But at least I understand the room. I know what's going on and I know where the problems are and all that kind of stuff. But if you just look at it, you'll see it's my production / mixing setup. But I'm not doing a whole lot of recording. I have good microphones here and stuff like that, but I don't do a lot of it here. I don't have a room that sounds good to record things like acoustic guitars and vocals in. So that's what I go to Flux and other studios for. Can't do that these days, and you can't invite anybody to the studio anyway. So that doesn't really make a difference. So what I've turned to doing is focusing more on mixing and additional production and things like that. And this rig really works well for that.
Yeah.
Top to bottom, I'm just working with a set of Focal Solo 6s. I'm so used to the Focal tweeter. I've used the SM9s. I've used every other Focal speaker. The appropriate size for this room was the Solo 6. Underneath the desk is a Tannoy TS10 12-inch or 10-inch 450 watt powered sub that rarely gets switched in. I only get switched in when I want to have fun and I want to turn it up. So when the mix is done and I really want to hear that sub thing that goes, ooh, I'll pop that sucker in and it's just fun for me, but I don't mix with it very often. On top of the Focal Solo 6s are a very old set of the Radio Shack Auratone version. It's like the Radio Shack Auratone 5C. It's a full range speaker. Sounds terrible, but it's mid-focus and helps you zone into a couple of places in the mixes that are otherwise difficult to hear. Beneath that, it's kind of hard for everybody to see, I'm sure, but there's a Apollo in there. There is a Dangerous D-Box. Normally those two items go together in a soft rack, and that is my kind of go-to rig for carrying around the city if I have to go do a gig where I'm recording a voiceover or I'm doing the late night show with Seth Meyers or Stephen Colbert, and I need to do a playback system. That's what I use for that. It's extremely versatile and powerful in 2 rack spaces. And that's actually what I started out with. I had the original D-Box and another Apollo, and that was what I used at home. That and a pair of NS10s and a pair of Dynaudio speakers. And I did very basic things on those. But there's also a whole host of other Dangerous stuff. I'm a very, very big into the Dangerous ecosystem. So you'll notice there on the bottom left is a whole bunch of green lights and black stuff. That's the entire Dangerous rig. There you go. So from top to bottom, the Convert 2, that's my main playback D to A. And then below that is the main A to D, which is where everything returns back into pixels from analog land. That's the AD Plus. Below that are 2 Convert 8s. Those are 8 channels each of analog, or rather digital to analog. And those feed the bottom unit, which is the Dangerous Q-Bus Plus. So that's my summing unit. From there, it goes out to the next rack. There you go. And it's going to go into that Dangerous compressor. From the Dangerous compressor, it's going to go into the Bax EQ. And then from the Bax EQ analog, it's returning back to that AD Plus. That's how it returns back into Pro Tools. So that's the analog loop. Now I've got some other stuff that I can insert in different places if I want to. Part of that is in the next thing. That's an Anthony DeMauro 1500. It's a dual tube compressor. I have another Dangerous compressor. And below that is just an Apogee 2-channel mic pre D to A, or A to D rather. that I used to use as my front end. It just happens to be sitting there. I'm not using it for anything. It's a pretty paperweight at the moment.
Right.
But I've got some other where I've got an LA2A, a couple 1176s that are just, I have no need for them in this rack. It'd be great to have everything in front of me, but there just isn't the space. I live in a small Manhattan apartment, me and my kitty cat.
Nice.
And she doesn't do a whole lot of mixing. She's more into producing these days, right?
Little file prep and stuff.
Right. So you've been working with who? ASAP Rocky, right? Okay. Anyway, so that's the rundown, and I got a couple guitars on the wall, and I have the Native Instruments Ultimate setup with all the samples and all that kind of stuff. So I can do production on the fly here pretty easily. If I need a guitar part, I'm not a guitarist, disclaimer. But if I need to throw down a couple of chords or a little rhythm part, I can hack it.
Right.
I can drop in a live bass line if I want to. I got a couple of guitars here, and there are a couple more on the way. I'm probably going to buy a Tele, and I'm probably going to buy a Les Paul at some point. But that's just an Epiphone DOT 335 copy, a Fender American Jazz. I think it's a 97 or 98, and then a 1954 Harmony Silvertone, which gives me a weird flavor, which I kind of dig. It sounds like playing a fence post with strings on it, but it has a vibe. So it's just about different flavors, and I got a little box of percussion stuff, and I've got some mics that I can set up in stereo. I also have one of those Townsend Labs Sphere microphones. So that thing, man, I'm impressed by that Townsend Labs Sphere. The modeling on it is really quite excellent. And in lieu of having $100,000 to buy all those mics, this works for me here for what I need.
Right.
So it's pretty flexible, man. I kind of have everything I want. I use an iPad for a number of different things. I use the Monitor Decibel, which is the process audio plugin that gives you a whole lot of ideas about your sound levels. And
see it up on the screen there.
Yeah, I was mixing with it right before we hopped on. I use it for everything, so I can pardon me. So I can monitor it right here as a plugin, or I can monitor it on my iPad. My iPad, I can also use PT control, so that gives me touch control for faders and a whole bunch of other stuff in Pro Tools. So that takes the place of a larger control surface, which I would probably normally want to have if I had more space, but I don't. And then in addition to that, I can also use an app on my D-Box or on my iPad to control my D-Box Plus.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting, cool stuff about that. One of which is you can actually do TalkBack through the iPad. It uses the iPad microphone to do TalkBack into the headphone cue system.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That's great because you can be anywhere in the room at that point.
Be anywhere.
Just pass to a client or something. That's cool.
In the next room, as long as you're on, hitting the Bluetooth distance, you're good.
Yeah. That's cool. I didn't know it did that.
It's as compact as it can possibly be, but still be fully functional. That would
right.
Be,
Right. Well, I want to go back to one of the pieces here, kind of selfishly, because we were talking about this thing before we got on here, and you had a cool story about it. So that is this top unit here.
Yeah, that's the Anthony DeMario Labs CL 1500. It's a stereo tube compressor limiter, and this one has a little bit of provenance. A very good friend of mine who I worked with for almost a decade, well, more than a decade. Justin Smith, his name, everybody knows him as Just Blaze, super hip hop producer who's done umpteen thousand amazing songs. I had the pleasure of working with him for 10 years. And in 2008, we did a song called Live Your Life with T.I. and Rihanna, where when I was doing the mix, Rihanna has this big bridge part that comes in, and it's like everything drops away, and it's just sort of this keyboard part behind her, and it's just her vocal, right? Opportunity or scary shit. What are you going to do? Like, it's Rihanna. Like, what are you going to do? So I started going through compressors to find the one that was going to give me the flavor that I wanted. She definitely needed some compression. Let's start with that. I felt like she needed some dynamic leveling, and I knew that some sort of gentle compression was going to be the thing. Or maybe I could try something like an 1176, which is what I did first. I tried a couple different revs of an 1176. and it brought it forward, but it didn't make it sing. It wasn't giving that mojo, that magic, and that's what I was looking for. I didn't want just compression. I wanted magic.
Yeah.
I tried an 1176 of a couple different varieties. I think a Rev F and a Rev E, and a special edition, or one of the silver face blue stripes. And then I tried an LA 2A. I tried a 2-Tech CL1B, and it's amazing. I'm just remembering this process now.
Yeah,
it was a long time. It was 12 years ago. And we tried a number of other things, and everything was just like, it just sucked the life out of it. Her vocal was dynamic, and it sounded amazing already. So what's one of our jobs? It's like a doctor. First, do no harm.
Right.
So I don't want to do any harm to her amazing performance.
Yeah.
Then I finally tried out the left channel of this tube compressor. And as soon as I put it on and put 3 or 4 or 5, maybe something like that, dB worth of gain reduction on it, there was no question at that point that it was the right one. And it just made that whole part sing and the unit. And fortunately, I still keep in contact with Just Blaze often. We're good friends, and he's an extremely nice guy. And one day he was talking about all this gear that he had in storage, and he wanted to go through it and bring some of it into his home studio and decide whether to keep or let go of some of the other stuff. I reminded him that we use this way, and he said, "Well, and then you got to hang on to it, man. Take it for now, and hang on to it, and use it. It brought us both good luck, and it was just an extremely generous thing to do. And that's just the kind of guy.
Yeah.
He's just a super guy. And so now it's in my possession, and I'm going to take care of it, and I'm going to use it, and hopefully it'll sing on another record."
Yeah, that's amazing. When we were talking about it, you described like the vocal initially as sounding a little flat texturally, not pitch wise.
Right.
Yeah.
Texturally, it was a little bit flat. I suspect they used a solid state mic and preamp on it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes you need a little bit of that tube flavor. You need a little bit of hair on it. And I think that's what did it with this particular unit. It just, it got a little bit of nuts on it by running it through this, and a little bit of gain reduction sort of helped tame it down a little bit. And I think we just did a little bit of EQ and some effects after that. That was it, dude. Sometimes that simple. And that goes back to what we were saying, is like, you don't need 1,000 processors. Sometimes it's one thing that makes the difference. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's doing absolutely nothing that makes the difference. You guys have had some amazing engineers on here, but one of the most amazing engineers in the world that you had on was Al Schmidt.
Yeah.
And Al Schmidt will tell you unequivocally, if you ask him, that sometimes it just needs nothing except for fader rides. It's just a volume adjustment. Or maybe you just need to pull out some of the most, offensive frequencies down there in the low mid range to get some mud out, and then control the volume. They used to call us balance engineers.
Right.
When?
Yeah.
That was our job. We were supposed to be balancing things. We weren't called EQ engineers. We weren't called compression engineers. We were balancing engineers. And so I take that moniker seriously. And that is Al's general philosophy, from what I understand. Now, I met Al a number of times, and he's a super sweet guy, and not even arguably one of the most talented engineers to ever walk the planet. And I've always tried to follow his advice when it comes to things like that. And a lot of times less is more. And if something really is badly in need of help, you can try to do some extreme things to fix it. But a lot of times the answer is go back and fix the production, or try to fix it in a way that isn't about applying a whole bunch of processing. It's more about correcting things so that it becomes a correctly recorded piece of work.
Right.
Something that needs a great effort to fix.
Right. Awesome. Well, on that line, and kind of what we were talking about before too, do you have any tips for any producers that might be watching that are going to be working with a mix engineer and they need to prep their session stuff? Do you have specific things that you like to see when it comes in?
Sure. If it doesn't sound okay without 1,000 plugins on it, or without any plugins on it, then you may consider fixing things from a production standpoint. Maybe something needs to be re-recorded, or maybe your gain staging is all wrong, or maybe something is distorted, and you have to make a decision: are we going to run with that because the performance was so good that we don't want to risk redoing it. But, in this day and age, you can just make a new playlist and try something else. And if it doesn't work, okay, then you run with the original. It's about the song. It's about the performance. So I would say, look at things from that perspective. And so when you end up turning it over to a mix engineer, that mix engineer, whoever he or she is going to go, okay, I'm happy. I can sit down and I can put my creative stamp on this and polish it and make it shine rather than fixing a whole bunch of stuff. You really don't want to give your engineer problems to solve before they can become creative with something. So that's number one. And number two, be astute with your housekeeping. And I mean by that, have no extraneous files that are not needed in the session. Get rid of tracks that are not needed in the session. I don't care if you mute them. If I get it and I'm looking at it, I'm going to be like, did they mean to mute this or did they not mean to mute this? Now I have to make a fucking phone call to find out. And that all takes away from my ability to get your mix done in a timely way and in a creative and professional way. The other things that I would recommend is make sure that everything is labeled. Label a track before you record something to it so that the resultant files have that name on it. Then I don't have to go looking for things that are named audio file 304, fuck neck, breakback, stupidness. You know what I mean?
Right.
My file line, that's just me. But, make sure everything's labeled. And if you really want to be nice to your mix engineer, make sure everything is edited properly. If it needs to, you go ahead and tune it. If it needs, and I like to, when things are color coded and organized, put the drums in one section, make them all one color. Put the basses in one section, make them a different color. Guitars, same thing. Everything, same thing. Vocals, same thing. It doesn't matter what your color scheme is. It's just have it organized in a way so that when somebody who's not familiar with it looks at it, says, that makes sense to me. Now I don't have to guess. I don't have to make a phone call. I don't have to make an email. I don't have to make a text. I don't have to guess. I don't got to throw my hands up in frustration and go, now I got to spend time deciphering what you did before I can do my job. Nothing that's irritating than having to spend an hour or 2 hours cleaning up somebody else's mess because they were too lazy to do it. And I'm sorry if that's you. Don't be lazy.
Yeah, they so one thing that happened to me early in my career was I worked at a post-production house, and that basically was like doing audio for things like car commercials or whatever. So like Toyota commercials and stuff like that. And there were 3 of us on the team, so 3 different engineers, and they had a set of rules in place. It was like extremely strict, and it was just that every engineer had to be able to open up any other engineer's session at any point and be able to understand it quickly and do what they had to do. And I still carry that like to this day, even though like, it probably will not happen that most of my mixes will be opened by another person at some point. But I still carry that thought process in of like, even for my future self, to be kind to my future self, if I have to reopen it, I don't want to look at it and be confused about what's happening there.
Totally.
It's always like good practice.
A word for that.
What's that?
They have a word for that practice.
What's that?
Called being professional.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. In its most basic form. Yeah.
If you want to be a bedroom artist and you're the only person who's going to look at your stuff and you prefer to be disorganized, fine.
Yeah.
But you're going to send it to a professional mix engineer or producer or mastering, house or person. There are protocols that are just basic.
Right.
Just basic,
Yeah. They were actually morose about it there. They always had the thing of like, you could get in a car accident on the way here and then we wouldn't be able to work on the project. It's like, whoa. But
that's true.
It's a good point.
All kinds of things happen. You can never really predict it. And again, I can't stress this enough. We're talking about projects that people have been planning on, and it's their baby. It's their creative output. It's the summation of their creative life to this point. And they may have even spent a lot of their own money on it.
Yeah.
I don't think you need any more information than that. If you're going to be respectful and professional and kind and courteous, you're going to do it. Yeah.
Do you normally just have people send you the session, or do you tell them like, freeze the stuff down in audio files and send it that way?
It really depends on who it is and how familiar I am with them. I have learned to trust producers a little bit more these days when I kind of know what their work product is like. If they're doing stuff and making effects and doing changes with EQ and compression and stuff like that, and I think they're doing a really good job at it, I am not going to try and reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
I will ask them for frozen tracks so that I can't unfreeze them if I want to.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people are working in different DAWs and that they can't send me a frozen Pro Tools track, right? So I'll ask them to send me printed stems, but I'll give them some guidelines of, turn everything off on the master fader, make sure that, you give me a dry one and a wet one. And by that, I mean one with your effects and your processing and one that has nothing on it. So I can make a choice. Or if I feel like I want to save them some time and maybe I trust them a little bit, I'll say, send me the wet ones, but be prepared. I might call you and say, give me X, Y, and Z dry because I don't like what you did here and it doesn't fit into my scheme of what I'm doing. But I also try to trust instincts from even junior producers and artists who don't know what they're doing. Sometimes that's an advantage. You know what I mean? They might be hearing things in a way that I wouldn't have guessed or I wouldn't have thought of. So I'll always ask for the rough mix. I want to know what they were hearing, what they were doing, what they were living with, and what was in their head. And then sometimes I'll even ask them for a couple of references. Hey, what songs are out there on the radio that you heard that you would love to be able to compete with? And then so we set up a target for ourselves, right? It's a goal to hit. And in the process of doing that with the artist, you're building trust, you're building a rapport, you're building a relationship, you're helping them to learn a little bit more. You're learning a little bit more too. Yep. And then, and it just makes the whole thing easier and more enjoyable. And it makes you feel like a collaborator to them rather than just a contractor. I think a lot of mix engineers can feel like just a contractor because it feels like this thing that you've done so much work on and you put so much energy into it, and then you're supposed to just go over the internet here.
Right.
Please make it good.
Right. Yeah. Like, don't worry about it. I'm a trustworthy person.
Right.
Really. Over the internet.
I talk about the relationship thing, right? I mean, it's just so important to form good relationships. I don't know if there's a mix engineer on the planet who's had any success who would disagree with that.
Right. Yep. Yeah. It also helps, like you asking for reference tracks and all that stuff kind of gives you a level of their expectation too, which is nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because
how about
if you hear something, you hear their track and their rough mix for whatever reason just doesn't have the kind of low end, that maybe they're expecting, that reference mix will tell you a lot. What I mean? They might send you something that's just got no low end at all, and that's what they think sounds amazing. And so you kind of have that discussion with them. You're like, all right, well, I would have chosen to put more low end in this, more kick drum or more 808 or more bass or whatever it might be. Or I might have chosen to bring the vocal more forward or have it bigger. But I hear what you're going for, and let's try to work together to make that as good as possible. The reference could be the thing that creates the context for you. Right.
I had one, this one was really fun, and I actually use this all the time now because I learned so much from it. But I had a client that gave me 2 references, and the first one was Billie Eilish's Bad Guy. And then the second one was Ariana Grande's Boyfriend.
Okay.
Do you know those 2 mixes?
I know both of them. I can't put together in my head what the sonic differences are at this moment. So maybe.
So on the Ariana Grande one was like one of the brightest things I've ever heard. And then the Billie Eilish one is a super dark record.
Okay.
Those were both the reference tracks. So then it was amazing because right away it just opened up a huge conversation of, okay, well, let's like unpack this. What do you like about this one? And then also here's the giant contextual difference between these 2 things.
Right.
Do you hear that? And what are your feelings about that? And then we start talking about like how bright the record should be and everything. But I actually made a playlist out of that because I like consider that the 2 ends of the spectrum. At that point, it's like, here's dark, here's bright. And it's really useful to like.
I'm going to write those down so I can use that.
Yeah.
But
it was pretty crazy.
Another opportunity though, too, because it's an opportunity to hear what the commonalities are between those 2 things. They clearly did something that they liked in both of them. And I usually find that when I run into something like that, at the end of the day, the story becomes something like, and this is not true about these songs, but both of these have a lot of negative space, or at least have some negative space in a bridge section that drops you off a cliff and then, brings you right back in and smacks you in the face. Maybe that's the thing that's the common denominator between the two things. And that's where that discussion can become super productive and super helpful. And at the same time, again, I will stress this, that when you get that context and when you make that connection and you illuminate that for the artist or the producer, they go, holy shit, yeah, that's right. That's what it is. And then they've got now another tool, and then they have a new friend in you who understands them.
Right.
Win.
Yep. Yeah. You never want to let that person go, because they're the one that now you have this rapport with of understanding, and they know your taste and all of that stuff. So
sure,
it's good value. Well, let's get to some questions from the audience here. So again, anybody who's watching on Crowdcast, right below the video, there's an Ask a Question area. So submit your questions there and upvote any of the ones that you guys see that you want to hear answered too. So let's start with the most upvoted one. And this one is from Enrico. And he says, hi, Ryan, what's your go-to Mixbus chain or chains in case you use different ones depending on the genre or project?
Okay. Hi, Enrico, and thank you very much for the question, and thank you for watching and being with us today, and I hope you're safe and healthy. It does change. More often than not, what changes is whether or not I use compression on the Mixbus and what type. It can be something like a hip hop mix that's got a lot of transients, and maybe I want it to snap a little bit more, and I don't want to really control the gain all that much, but just get some more dynamics into it. That's going to be an SSL type compressor, an SSL G type compressor. That might, well, let's be clear. That'd be the first thing I would try and see if it works. Right. I wouldn't just keep it on it because I think that's what that type of thing requires, or that's what somebody else or everybody else might do.
Yeah.
Put it on and try it and ask yourself, does this elevate the thing? Does this make it sound better? Does this take me another level up?
Yeah.
And so that's always going to be my decision tree. Try it, or, what do I think it needs? What suits that? Give it a try. And then for shits and giggles, try the other ones too. Maybe try a manly, Varimu, which is much softer sounding. Maybe try a Chandler. Maybe try, a Neve compressor or a Focusrite compressor. I end up using any number of different ones, but they're all somewhere in one of those. Love the Chandler stuff. It does its own thing.
Right.
L stuff does its own thing. Neve does its own thing. Manly certainly does its own thing. More often than not, though, I'm using summing an awful lot. On most mixes, I'm using the summing in my rig, and I have my Dangerous compressor, and I really like that compressor because it is transparent as hell, and I can get whatever type of compression or even limiting on it, and I have to work hard to really hear the compression, and I really like that because it helps me control dynamic a little bit. So I may do that on the way back into the DAW, just to give me a little bit of dynamic control and to smooth it over slightly. And then maybe I'll even use something like a transient designer on the whole mix coming back in to give it a little bit more snap if I don't feel like I want to use any more compression from something like an SSL and I want to give it some more snap. So that's the thing. It's a decision tree. What does this need? What tools do I have? And I'll try them and apply them. And if it's doing the thing that I wanted, then I'm going in the right direction. If it's getting me happy, if it's not making me stand up and want to slap the taste out your mouth, it's not right. It's got to make me excited. If it's not making you excited, if it's just compression, then why are you doing it?
Right.
So that's one thing. Sometimes I use an EQ. I have a back EQ that comes right after the Dangerous compressor and my hardware chain. And that, again, is kind of like a no color EQ.
Yeah.
And, so sometimes that's the option for me to open up my top end. I might, open it up at 8K or above just a little bit. And then I can give it a bump, down near 74 or 73, I think is the frequency. And it's got filters on the top and the bottom. So I can kind of shape things that way. I tend not to use a ton of EQ on a mix. I want all those things and all those moves to happen inside my mix rather than try to place a patina of an EQ over the whole thing. Now, that being said, it can be really useful on some mixes to do that. So sometimes I'll use something like a massive passive that I know is going to give me color, and I'll place that after my compression, just to give myself a little bit of makeup, wherever I might need it.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two of the things that I might do. One thing that ends up on nearly every mix that I ever do is a UAD plugin. It's the Ampex ATR 102 mastering tape deck. And I have a specific setting, and I have a story behind that that I use. I was once doing a panel with two very, very well-known engineers. One was Andy Wallace, and the other one was Bob Ludwig, who is a famous mastering engineer. And Bob is just a fucking genius. And so we were on the phone like a week before. It was going to be a live panel at Webster Hall, New York City.
Wow.
And Bob very generously said, "Hey, why don't you guys give me a 30-second snippet of a couple of the last mixes that you did, unmastered obviously, and I'll master them, and then on the panel we'll play them back, and we'll talk about before and after and what that process is like. It'll help me illuminate what I do." Yeah. Fucking great. Bob,
right.
I did. Okay, fantastic. Yeah. He's mastered other things before, but I've never got a chance to interact with him.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I sent him 2 copies of this thing. One said with 102, and the other one was just main mix, right? He calls me back and says, "What's the difference between these things?" And I said, "One is has this plugin on it, and the other one doesn't." And he's like, "Oh, that's very interesting." Yeah. Because I have an ATR 102, and this seems pretty similar. Let me tell you the settings that I use on my ATR 102 and try it. So he said,
nice.
It's a 1/4 inch off of 1/2 inch, and he told me changes to make it a plug, and I did, and it was amazing. And it's I still use that to this day. I think it's an amazing plugin. It definitely gives me a lift. You just put it on, man, and if you don't even change anything from the default setting, turn it off and turn it on, and tell me there's not a lift that happens there. Tell me it doesn't give you goosebumps and make you happy. So it ends up on a lot of mixes, but again, it's the kind of thing where I put it on and I take it off. Is it better? Is it doing the thing that I wanted it to do? You have to ask yourself that question all the time, because if you start doing things the same way all the time, you eventually become indifferent to whether they're actually working or not.
Right.
So a lot of times, and if I've got to turn over a mix to a client and they're not going to master it, I'll do something there to elevate the levels. I think somebody else in the questions there asked what loudness unit I measure to.
Yes.
If it's going to a client who I know is not going to master it, I try to get competitive with it. First off, do no harm. I don't want to screw it up. I don't want to change the mix dramatically. That's not, the decisions that I was making while I was mixing it were made for a reason. And I try to bring the mix together that way. Now, a little bit of light limiting and a little bit of light maximization, and maybe some slight EQ correction if you're hearing something later on, can be really beneficial and can sort of bring it together and make it feel more mastered, though I wouldn't call it mastered.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'll do that. I tend to use very transparent limiting. I really like the Weiss stuff from Softtube. If you haven't checked it out yet, do yourself a favor. If you think Softtube is just another plugin company who's not making great stuff, think again. They took the algorithms from Weiss's hardware units that are digital, by the way, and 1-to-1 port to the plugin. They sound dead freaking on.
That's awesome.
And they're amazing. Yeah. You should really give them a try, especially if you're a person who likes to use limiting a lot. You'll find those extraordinarily musical and useful.
Very nice. And a lot of the UAD plugins as well are also Softtube.
Yeah, I'm a huge UAD fan. I've been using them since the UAD one came out. I don't know what year that was. It must have been 2003 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I've seen their growth, and I know the people at the company, and they're all wonderful, and they all really care about this. And they're always trying to develop a better product, and they're working very hard on it. And they put the time and the money and the personnel, the right personnel, into the development. And that's why I stand behind them, and I will always stand behind them, because they really care about what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're making products for working people.
Yeah.
Now to answer the question about the loudness units, man, if I'm really trying to make it competitive, I know I'm going to be hitting around a -9.
Yeah.
I don't like to go more than that. Some people want to go to 7. Some people want to go to 6. I don't see that as being necessary. I don't want to play that game. Now, if it's going to be mastered, I don't do any of that.
Mm.
You need to have a good mastering engineer or a couple of good mastering engineers and trust them. But here's the thing: if you're used to using that sort of thing on your master bus, and you feel like when you take it off, your mix just doesn't sit up, work more on the mix.
Right.
That would be
Right.
my.
Yeah.
But
Don't have the limiter be the balancing engineer.
yeah, if it's going to get mastered, I don't worry too much about it. But hey, you want to have enough gain there, right? You don't want them trying to make up 10 dB worth of gain. So
Right.
negative 14
Yeah.
ish.
Yeah.
But trying to preserve dynamics as much as possible.
Right. If it's obviously that's going to be different. Like if you're mixing a folk thing or something, are you still going to go to neg 9 for a client?
Yeah. No, not even if I know they're not going to master it, because it's just not necessary. Nobody's worried about how loud the next song is going to be. Even if it goes to radio, it's hitting a limiter.
Right.
It's going to be brought up to the same level as everything else. Now, will it have the same impact? Your mileage might vary, but I tend to try to favor preserving dynamic and openness and the qualities of the mixers that I really, strove for to begin with. So, no, I'm not. I'm not going to do that.
Right. No way. Right. There's a different vibe with something that's up at neg 9 too. If you were to put something up to neg 9 and then bring it down to the -14 thing, you're going to feel a difference, obviously, because your dynamic range is changing and all that. So there's something about the style of that too. Like there's an energy that comes with that.
Yeah.
Obviously, and sometimes it's right.
Here's the other thing too. Like I can have my opinion on this kind of stuff. It doesn't mean I'm right. And it doesn't mean that if you're doing that you're wrong. It's really all about what are you coming out with on the other end? Is it awesome? Does it sound awesome? Does it make you want to get up and jump around because the mix just feels great and the song feels great? Hey man, I don't care what you do. I really don't. I don't care if you print the thing out to sheet music and wipe it out on an alligator's butt and then scan it back in to MIDI and then replay it. It doesn't really matter. If at the end of the day what you're coming out with is something inspiring and really works for the song, then it's right.
Yeah.
There's no wrong.
Right. I'm also going to go check Sweetwater for alligators now. Cool. Okay. So
you get the one with the version 2 butthole.
Yes. Right. It sounds way better, and it's one more than the one.
Right.
Nice. Okay. So, this is cool. So longtime friend, Guy Martin asks,
"What's up, Guy?
What's your go-to method for maintaining perspective on a big session?"
Take breaks. Learn to manage things. Part of what we do is definitely managing time, managing energy and expectations. So if you got a Whopper in front of you, let's say you got 130 tracks or something like that, the first thing that you should do is to make sure that it's all organized. And we were talking about this earlier. Hopefully, somebody who's given you that big of a session has got it organized.
Right.
Otherwise, you really got to tell them, like, look, man, this is a hot mess. We need to do something because it's going to take away from my ability to actually manage the whole thing.
Right.
Once you have it sort of together and you have things color coded and make sure that everything's labeled, then you can work on things in sections, so to speak. So what I'll do is I'll section off background vocals for the chorus and then ad libs for the verses, and then your top line, and I'll organize sections like with my keyboards and all that kind of stuff, and I'll just make it sort of visually appealing so that I can look at it and I can understand sort of the topography of the mix. And that gives me an idea of how to approach it. And then I think about, well, what is this song doing? The drums are so important and the lead vocal is so important, but really everything else in this mix, like keyboards and the percussion, stuff like that, fits around everything else, right?
Yeah.
These are the main focus points. The crux of the mix are these things. And so I tend to address those things first. It's like building the foundation of a house. I want to make sure that those drums are whapping and hitting hard, but that my gain staging is proper. I always have, obviously, I'm looking at my master fader. I'm looking at my return from my analog world and making sure that I'm not clipping anywhere that I don't want to clip. Now, sometimes you want that vibe, and that's a decision that you just need to make. But make sure it's a decision. That's
Mm-hmm.
an important um, thing to delineate. Is that if it happens because you were unaware or being lazy and it's a happy accident, that's fine, but you didn't do it.
Yep.
Yeah, do it thoughtfully.
Yeah. Right.
So what you're trying to do, you're trying to set yourself up to make thoughtful decisions, and you can only do that when you understand everything that's going on in the mix. So then it's your job to sort of go through everything and understand the arrangement of the song, so that you know that, hey, you know, if I'm doing this here in this section of the song, maybe it's going to turn into something different by the time we get to the pre-chorus or whatever. So understand the arrangement. And if you're not a musician, that's a little bit more difficult, but you can train yourself rather easily to understand that. Get a book on composition and theory, get a book on song arrangement. And if you can't do any of those things, if you're not into the whole academic thing, then do yourself a favor and get a pack of 3x5 note cards.
Mm-hmm.
And then write the name of the section of the song on each one. Okay. Intro, verse 1, pre-chorus 1, chorus 1, verse 2, da-da-da. One card for each one of them. And I like try to lay them out. Or you can even do it on a single sheet of paper and just do boxes and sort of like chart it in. It gives you a visual reference of what's going on in the song. So that if you're not so familiar with arrangement, and maybe you're not a musician and it's just this is a struggle for you, you have another way to look at it and another way to understand what's happening in a certain part of the song. And on each one of those things, you can make little notes. Okay, first verse comes in, all this other stuff drops out. That lead vocal becomes the focus. And it's just maybe a padded keyboard and some percussion behind it. And you can make a decision tree by writing it down. And I know that's very simplistic, but it gives you another way to look at it. And gets it out of your head, right? So I think that can be really, really helpful, especially if you're new to understanding arrangements.
Awesome. That's great.
There's a lot of things I would do. I would just set myself up for success. It's not about the EQ moves.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah. To expand on that a little bit, the especially with the song arrangement thing and taking notes on that, what's the first thing that you do? You get a session in, let's say, and you're opening it up for the first time, you're about to mix. What's the first thing that you do? After you've done all the like setup and routing, the first time that you're gonna, hit play and go.
I think I touched on it, and it's just, I want to hear the whole thing together. Okay, first off, I don't focus on individual elements at first. It's not the first thing I do. We talked about this. They used to call engineers back in the day, they called us balancing engineers, not EQ engineers or compression engineers, balancing engineers. So what's balancing? Balancing is setting relative volumes to one another so that you can bring the song into perspective and all the instrumentation into perspective. It's almost like you were being in the room with a band as they were playing, and you can't hear the vocals, so you go over to the PA and you turn it up so that you can hear it in context. Well, drummer's just not hitting the snare drum hard enough, and you go, hit that fucking snare, man. Yeah. This is a rock song. Hit that hard. Yeah. So, I start to listen for things like that, and I go through the song from beginning to end, which I find is a really important thing. Yeah. From beginning to end of the song so that I can understand the structure of it. And it's at that point that if you're doing this practice, you would go through those note cards and start writing down the sections of the song, and maybe even give yourself a little bit more information. What bar does that happen at? What timestamp does that happen at? Give yourself as much possible information as you can so that you can start understanding the whole song. But I like how you zeroed in on that, Mark, and that's because you're an experienced
leading the witness a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, you got to understand the song from beginning to end. So I'll go through it several times, and I'll have my iPad with Pro Tools control up on it so that I have my faders and I can bank across. And if you got a great big control surface, even better because you have tactile faders in front of you. But that's one of the great things about mixing on a console is you have all that stuff in front of you, and you can grab for a fader. Like, oh, the snare's too low. Oh, the bottom of the snare is too low. I'm just hearing too much thwap. I want to hear more snare. So you can adjust those things pretty quickly. Do that fast. Do yourself a favor. Don't waste a whole lot of time on that. Take an hour. Take 2 hours. But don't take more than that. Get the
Nice.
balance of the song so that it feels right without you really doing very much of anything. If there's anything super glaring, like there's just something that's got a whole bunch of mud in it, you just need to cut it, great. Throw up a basic EQ, cut that low end, and move on very quickly.
Right.
Start making EQ and compression adjustments when you don't have a picture of the whole song. How could you possibly know what to do with that if you don't have a picture of the entire song? So I would say that's absolutely paramount. And that's the first thing I would do. And then, like I said, I would start zeroing in on little things that I think I can fix super quickly that's not going to distract me from the balancing operation.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I really love your note card idea, like the visual aspect of here's the intro, here's the verse. And then as you're kind of listening from that first time, just going through and making notes. And it's almost like you're giving yourself the to-do list of what needs to happen in the mix.
Right.
You're discovering the song and all that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mark. I keep doing
that. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It's a very bad habit. But here's where it's also extremely helpful. If instead of stopping to fix something while listening through the song, you just wrote it down on the note card, you do not get the opportunity to get mired into, oh, well, hey, maybe just this could use a little bit more, of this or some compression, or maybe now I really want to stick a reverb on this because I want to hear it that way. No, forget that.
Right.
You got to build the foundation. You got to build the balance of it first. And so getting away from that can be super helpful. One of the other things that I would recommend that everybody try is don't look at the edit screen of the DAW that you're working on as you're doing it, unless your goal is to make markers in the session as you're doing it. So maybe on the first pass, you can make markers in the session as you go along. Don't get mired in any of the details of compression or EQ or reverbs or anything else like that. And so you're setting yourself up again for understanding the progression of the song. If you're doing it on note cards and the verse comes in and you're like, I really need to make sure that this harmony vocal is just right behind the lead vocal, or I want to do these two, guitar parts that come in halfway through the second verse. I want to pan them out left and right. Mark it down real quick. And don't get hard in the details in your DAW, because that's just going to take you away from the objective. And what's the objective? The objective is to understand the song and its structure and what it needs and doesn't need. This will help you greatly in making better decisions about what it really needs as opposed to what your preconceptions might be. That will go a long way in helping get rid of some bad habits that you've already built up. And don't say you don't have, because everybody
does. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Nice. That's great. I always love when it sort of goes a little more meta and it's, zooming out on like what is it that we're actually doing here? It's not just about like, oh, I like a 4-to-1 ratio and all that.
So what are the two really important things that you and I talk about often, actually, and again, we talk about today is what does it really need, right? And once I've done something to it, go back to it and reevaluate it. Did it really do the thing that I wanted it to do?
Right.
Part of that is in context. Is it working with everything else, right? Maybe it sounds fantastic on its own, but that's the corner that you paint yourself into when you work on things in solo. And when you get lost in one particular detail and ignoring the overall balance of the mix. Yeah.
Right.
So if you do those fundamentals first, you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah. Awesome.
There's no other way to look at it.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Okay. So we got a couple more questions here. Let's burn. Are you doing okay on it?
Me?
Yeah. Okay. On time and everything?
Oh, yeah.
All good. Okay, cool.
Not like I don't know.
Yeah, true.
And I
kind of stuck.
5 o'clock this morning mixing. It's fine. I'm happy to be talking to other human beings.
Right. Yeah. Right.
I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah. Even through this awkward way of doing so, it's nice to see that there's people around, right? Cool. Okay, so Lewis asks, have you ever declined a project due to the quality of the recording, so that you don't damage your own reputation or career?
Yes and no. It doesn't really have anything to do with me damaging my reputation. It has everything to do with, is the project going to be good or not?
Yeah.
There are some that, it's not that I've turned them away, but sometimes what I've done is I've gone back to them and tried to be as helpful as possible. Again, try to help your clients out. Chances are you've got more experience in the studio than they will ever get, because you're doing this all the time and it's your focus. Their focus is on being an artist and writing songs and going out and performing and whatever else they got to do with their life. So you can be really, really helpful in that instance. If somebody hands me a project that's a mess and it's just not recorded well, I'll go back to them and I'll say, hey, look, I really think this could be done a whole lot better, a whole lot differently. Sure, I could sit here and try to spend time fixing it, but it's going to have to necessarily cost more money because it's going to take a lot more of my time. And you didn't hire me as an editing engineer, you hired me as a mixing engineer.
Right.
Now, that's up to you. If you want to be the type of person that hands out your time for free, more power to you. That's not me. I used to do that. But now, more often than not, what I'll do is I'll go back to them and I'll say, I'll go to the right person first off, who's responsible for making those decisions. And I'll say, you know what, this isn't really working. Is there a way we can fix this on the production end rather than me trying to do some crazy, backflips in order to fix something that, could have been done a whole lot better in a much more constructive way. And so I'll help them out in that way. And I'll say, like, look, if you want to go ahead and fix this, I'll put it on the bill. It's completely up to you. I don't particularly like to spend my time doing that. I think it's honestly, it's a little bit of a waste of my time when they could have done it on their end. And then sometimes when I feel like it's appropriate, I'll push it up the project to another engineer who is at maybe a phase or a stage in their career where this kind of work can be really helpful for them because A, could use a little bit of work. B, will cost the client less to do it than me charging them an exorbitant rate to do it. And I get to introduce a younger, less experienced engineer to a new client potentially that they may work with and record with eventually. Now, there is the possibility that that client maybe who doesn't know the difference may go with that younger engineer who's got a lot less experience and may deliver a less professional mix. But if that's really what that client wants, then you're still doing a service for them.
Right.
Maybe you lose a mix here or there. It's not the end of the world. I realize that when you're struggling and you're new, you want to take every opportunity, and every check means something because we all have to eat and we all have to feed our families and our addictions to gear and pay rent and live, right? And that's very, very important. So that's a judgment call on your own, but I would say be very careful not to take a project that you can't deliver something that you're proud of, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be unhappy with your own work. It's not really, very few people are checking credits to see who screwed up this mix. They're just going to go, that's not a good mix, and I'm going to let that go. Very few people would ever find out that you did it. There is a thing though that when you become, I don't know if there's famous engineers, but you build your own reputation, and if you have a reputation in the business as a professional, you wouldn't want to associate yourself with something that's would take so much effort in order to make it acceptable. You got to make a judgment call there.
Right. Well, I like
things I've turned away though.
Yeah. I like what you touched on about working with other people and referring work too, because that can also become a two-way street. And there's a couple of ways to do that too. Like, you don't necessarily even have to connect the client. You could subcontract somebody and then just say, I'll have this done, and all they care about is that it's done.
I've done that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good strategy.
Yeah. And they're also like, when you do that with somebody else, there's a good chance that engineer, if you built up a relationship with them, will probably find another thing that might be better for you to do, or they'll be busy someday and need to pass work off to you or whatever. So it's really good to build relationships like that.
Totally.
It's a good thing that you touched on.
We've had a really wonderful time with, like, everybody's connected online and we have opportunity to know each other on a much more personal level now than we ever did.
Right.
So it's really wonderful. It's one of the things that's changed dramatically since I started in this business, and I really appreciate the community that we have. And I think a lot of professionals do take time to nurture it. It's tough though sometimes because people do abuse that privilege. It's not a privilege to talk to me about this stuff because I'm a professional or because I have this many records under my belt. It's a privilege to talk to anybody about this stuff. Even from one junior engineer to another, or for me to talk to somebody who's got just a year or two under their belt. I've learned things from people who are much less experienced than me all the time. you know, all the way throughout my career, because I'm always looking for learning opportunities. That's what this is all about.
Right.
So
You're
we are
open for it.
extremely fortunate that we have this community. It didn't exist when I started. So
Right.
I've seen the birth, growth, and change of that. And
Right.
proud of the way that our community treats each other.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really great. And it's very humble of you, but I feel very privileged to be talking to you. Thank you for doing this.
I'm privileged to talk to you too, Mark. Especially with your coronavirus hair.
Right. Oh man, it's getting rough.
Dude, you don't know rough. This is why I'm wearing a hat.
I'm about to just buzz it off. We'll find out what I look like bald by the end of all this.
Yeah, right.
Awesome. So next question. This one is from Anan, and he says, huge fan of the Kid Cudi albums. They have such a unique sound, and I'm wondering how experimental the recording and mixing process was.
That was a really amazing time. I got to tell you, it was one of my favorite periods of my career because it was very experimental. Cudi didn't have any hangups about anything whatsoever. Right before the Kid Cudi records, there wasn't a whole lot that was commercially released that had a lot of effects on it. We were doing a lot of dry sounding records. There were very few vocals that had like big delays and reverbs and stuff like that on them. Nothing hugely mainstream. Now you could always find independent records that do anything that, you know, you could find bluegrass, gospel, you know, country records, you know, now that are full of delays and, you know, pitch effects. I mean, anything goes now. But at that time, and not a lot of that was happening. And so it was refreshing for me as a guy who grew up playing keyboards and liking music from, you know, the late 80s through the 90s and into the 2000s. Effects were a thing that I enjoyed. And as a mix engineer, I'm sure I loved experimenting and I loved trying different things and adding different textures. And the depth that we were able to play with on that record was not common at that point. So it was an extremely fun time, though it was serious at the same time. It was an expensive record to do. We were in wonderful studios like Chungking, which doesn't exist anymore, but also Right Track and Quad, and I mean, like all the places here in New York. It was one of those big projects where you feel the weight of how much is being spent on it and how much energy, how many personnel are involved and how serious those people were. But there was a certain amount of freedom that came with doing that record that wasn't common. So he let me try a whole lot of things. And some things he liked and some things he didn't. And what we ended up doing was what you heard, which was just sort of like this Space Cadet record where you know, if you had that record and an ounce of weed, you had a weekend. You know? Right. That's what that record was about. Both of the records that I did with him were about. It was an experience record, and it was just an album, really. It was, you know, there was a message thread that went through the whole thing, and we had a sonic thread that went through the whole thing, and it lent a certain amount of cohesion to the records in general. And I think where we found some joy and some success in it is that we were able to do that kind of record when it wasn't happening, you know, with most other artists. So we did play around a lot, and we played around a lot with a lot of different things. You know, we were doing some stuff on the box and some stuff on a console. I remember we were working in Frank Filippetti's room, which was Studio B at the time. I think it was called Legacy Studio. And Frank had really great converters, and he had a euphonics desk in there, which was uncommon. And so those EQs had a certain vibe to them. And then we had a whole lot of outboard gear. And then I think from there, we switched to Electric Lady in the A room, which comes with its own ghosts and its own vibe. And, you know, the glitches in the gear at the time were frustrating, but we also were able to find individual 1073s that were amazing, and individual LA2As and 1176s and microphones that were amazing. And we had a live room to play around with, and it was a true old school record making experience that's hard to come by anymore these days.
Right.
The budgets aren't there, and a lot of these
Yeah.
big studios have closed down, and frankly, a lot of the young artists are not familiar with working that way.
Right.
They are familiar with working on a laptop, in
Yeah.
a bedroom, on a pair of headphones, and
Yeah.
you know, that world still exists, but it's becoming a whole lot more rare these days. I think having the opportunity to make records in that way and understanding the tape console format and knowing how to work in analog land has informed what I do um, in the box and with summing and what little outboard gear that I do use now. So I think that's really, really, really helpful. It's informed my process. It's informed my thought process. And that was all very helpful going into that Cudi record and knowing all those things. And then, you know, being a musician too, I got to talk with the musicians on that level, the people that we were bringing in and the producers we were bringing in. It was truly a unique experience. And I know I've gone on talking a lot about this, but that was one of the favorite records that I've ever done. And thank you for your compliment on that. It was very close to my heart.
That's awesome. Very cool. What are the names of the 2 records for people to check out?
Well, there's Man on the Moon, and then there's Man on the Moon 2, and then there were like subtitles to it. There was the Man on the Moon. Oh, it was so long ago. I forget. It's like the Legend of something, and what was it? But it's Man on the Moon 1 and Man on the Moon 2. Those are the official album titles.
Nice.
But
Nice.
some of those songs, man, were just so trippy. Just so trippy.
Right. Right. That's awesome. I could totally talk your ear off about concept records that have threads throughout them, and you know how that informs.
Records I grew up with.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And those are the things that I enjoy the most, where it's an experience, you know, it's not just a single, like, oh, this is the next Cardi B thing, or, you know, or whatever. They were creating, you know, a vibe.
Yeah.
And I think it came through, you know.
What kind of discussions did you guys have at the beginning of the project with that?
Some of the discussions were loosely based around how little rigidity we wanted in the process and in the final product. We wanted it to be free flowing, you know, and I say I mean Cudi. Really wanted to be free flowing. He is a very open, free flowing kind of guy, and he initially set the tone that way in the sessions, and then everybody who was involved carried on with that tone throughout. And I think that was a big boon to the record, because that vibe and that attitude and that feeling comes across when you make records, especially when you're spending months at a time making a record. You know, one of the questions is how do you remain focused? Well, there are some things that are important to focus on, and there's some things that are not. You can't overburden yourself with controlling every detail. What you can do is set the tone and have the right people, the right collaborators together in the room at the same time. And that's where the magic happens. Awfully difficult to make that magic happen, you know, over the internet with a couple of files here and there. Sure, it work that way. And yeah, great records have been made that way. But in general, getting people in the room that are the right people for that room and have the right tone set by the people who should be setting that tone, artists, producers, and then in turn myself, you know, part of my career has been that the luck in my career has been that I got recognized by record label executives and managers and artists and producers as being a team player, somebody who would come in and you know, understand the room and understand who I was working with and what the goal was, and then everybody getting on the same page and working towards that goal. And then also everybody doing what they do best and letting other people do what they do best too. So that's a little bit of a producer's role, and to look at the room and look at the gaggle of people and say, all right, well, here's how I think this is best going to come together, by this person doing that because they're really excellent at that, and this person doing that, and then keeping everybody from meddling in other things where it's necessary. But that role has fallen away from the producer in recent years, because on hip hop records especially, but also pop records and even rock records now, you'll have a couple different producers. Minimum. So who's in control of that? Is it the A&R person?
Right.
That's not their job. What they're there to do is to manage everything, all the logistics, and make sure people are there on time, and make sure that the invoice is signed at the end of the night, and that the hard drives are, backed up and in triplicate, and all those. And even some of that stuff is fallen away from the A&R people, and a lot of it has fallen to guys like me.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I made it my business to make sure that I took control of that, took charge of that, and made sure everybody knew that I would be responsible and I would pick up the slack where everybody left off. So I think that was kind of helpful to some clients, because it takes some of the responsibility and the burden off their back, and they can be a little bit more at ease and do the job that they are there to do. Now, I say that as a tracking engineer in that sort of situation. As a mix engineer, that's all that's removed from the equation, because you're not going to be in the room with them most of the time. Sometimes,
right?
And you're not there to have to herd people into a scenario. You're there to make it sound amazing, and yeah, you have to collaborate with people, but that can be done a little differently.
Right. Yeah, awesome. Let's see what else we got here. There's a quick one. Jack K asks if you have any favorite libraries for cinematic work.
No, I don't focus on cinematic work. I'm sure that there are some amazing, really, like dedicated cinematic libraries. I've seen commercials for some of them, but I am a keyboard player and a musician, and I like to make sounds often. That being said, using the Native Instruments Ultimate setup with their keyboard, which I have over here, allows me to select right from the keyboard. It's got two little LCD screens on there that displays my library, and I can select through and hear samples of them very, very quickly. There are quite a few libraries in there that have the potential for those sort of sounds. So I would say if you want something that's a little bit of a catch-all to get started with, that gives you a good deal of what you need to do that, and you can pick out patches and you can play keyboards a little bit, run with that, because what you're going to end up paying for that, I think, is like $1,500 or $1,700, something like that. And it's a very, very comprehensive solution. It gives you a lot to work with.
Yeah. That controller too, you can move really, really quickly, and like you said, just make decisions quickly, which is nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we are almost hitting the 2-hour mark. I can't believe it's going this fast. Wow. It's crazy. So let's do one more question and wrap it up. All right. This is a big one. So Chris Vernus, hey Chris, asks, do you have any mixing considerations or processing techniques on how the low end things like kicks or bass will sound in an iPhone speaker or other systems with really weak low end? Thanks for your time.
Yep, absolutely. Monitor on those systems. Check your mixes on those systems. That's really, until you're so familiar with the monitors that you use in general for your mixes and your room, I would say check on those sources. I use a number of different things. You can see up here, those are the Oratone knockoffs. Those give me some information that I don't get from my Solo 6s.
Yeah.
Over here, let's see if I can pan over. These are like $30 computer speakers. They're Altec Lansing BX 1220s or something like that. Yeah, BX 1220 or BXR 1220s. I got them on Amazon for like $20 or something like that. And those are just little computer speakers. So that gives me some insight into what's going on with that. I learned that trick from a really famous mastering engineer named Howie. I won't say his last name. He's mastered a lot of things that you and I love, all the Nirvana records, like a whole lot of rock stuff. But he had a set that's similar to it. And I visited him one day, and I was looking at his vintage Neumann mastering desk, and a pair of those sitting on top. I'm like, and then he had a whole wall of amazing speakers. I'm like, what are these for, dude?
Yeah.
And so he just showed me. He's like, here's what I can hear on these, and here's what I hear on these, and here's what I hear on this. And it was an ear-opening experience. And so I just bought a set, and they helped me to hear things in a small speaker, single full range speaker way that gives me different information than if I was just listening on a Focals. I also have the sub I can punch in when I want to. I listen on the laptop speakers. I listen on iPhone speaker, and I listen on iPhone earbuds. And that combination of things gives me a solid idea of what it's going to be like by the time it gets to you on the other end.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Those are options too, by the way. I'm not talking about, hey, go out and spend $9,000 on a pair of these barefoots or something like that. No.
Right.
You know, you can get all these Focal Solo 6s for 3,500 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the most expensive things in the world. They're kind of like the low end of the high end, I guess I would call it.
Yeah. Right.
There's nothing low end about them.
Yeah.
You know, you just have to pick you got to pick a really good speaker that's going to work in your room. So it's got to be the right size. If I had a bigger room, I might have gone with the Twins or the SM9s.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used SM9s for years as well.
Yeah.
But those are really inexpensive options. If you've got one set that you really love and you know what's going on with them, and it doesn't have to be an expensive set, you just have to understand them and you have to understand how they work in your room. How do you do that? Reference. Listen to all your favorite songs in as high quality format as you possibly can. Listen to them over and over again. Understand how they respond in your room. And don't just sit in front of your speakers and listen to them. Get up, walk around the room, walk into the corners, realize what's going on with the low end, walk out of the room with the door open, walk out of the room with the door closed. Turn them up loud, turn them down low. Understand what your speakers are doing and what they're doing in your room, listening to the type of music that you want to listen to. Information is what you need, and that's how you get it.
Great advice. Wow, that was great. Awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for taking all the time today to talk to us and for hanging out so long. This has been incredible. Yeah. Always fun talking to you. So.
Always fun talking to you guys too. Thank you everybody for stopping by to watch. Really appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got Ryan's website. There's a button you can click on to go check that out right below the video here. Ryan, where else can people find out about you?
I don't know. There's a lot of interviews and stuff that are on YouTube. There's stuff that I did for Puremix before. I've got a couple of videos there that are instructional videos. I've done videos for SoftTube and for Dangerous, and a number of other just sort of independently done videos. If you want to look at my discography, allmusic.com, just look up Ryan West. You'll see all the stuff that I've done if you're interested in that at all. I don't know what else. There's there's a lot of interviews and stuff like that out there. One of the ones I do like is I was fortunate enough to do the Sweetwater Minute with Mitch Gallagher, where we did like an hour-long interview, which was pretty cool. He's an amazing interview. He asked some really good questions. So that's all great. Well,
awesome.
Other than that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that's plenty. And you're on Instagram and all that stuff. And
on Instagram, Twitter. I am on Facebook, but I don't. I'm not a big fan of Facebook these days.
Yeah,
it's just me.
It's a crazy place right now.
Yeah, it's so crazy, and I don't feel like putting a light up my butt or drinking booze or anything. So.
Yeah. Right. Nice. Okay. Well, a couple housekeeping things. So stuff that we have coming up. Tomorrow is Ableton Live beat making with Stelios Philly, and basically Stelios is going to create a beat live on camera, and then Fab is going to mix it all in the same live session. So make sure you tune in for that. That's going to be fun. Monday we've got Andrew Talks to Awesome People with Tim Palmer, so that'll be fun. Tuesday is Vance Powell Reed Shippen with Butch Walker. It's going to be great. And next Wednesday, this one's going to be super fun. We've got Angel Lopez and Fede Vinver, who just produced the most recent Kanye record and the most recent Coldplay record. And I think there was even overlap when they were working on those, which is pretty crazy. But they are both in separate locations, and they are going to show their process of working together live with Ableton. And how they do like a Dropbox workflow, and they're going to create a track on air. So it's going to be pretty fun. And then let's see, a couple other things next week. The full schedule is available on puremix.net. We've got Alan Meyerson next Thursday, not Allison. And then Friday, we've got Joe Hamilton on. So make sure you join in and come hang out with us then.
You guys are busy.
It's crazy. It's craziness.
It's awesome.
Cool. Ryan, thank you again. This has been amazing.
Thank you for inviting me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you next time, guys.